Hey guys, welcome to Interior Analysis. I'm Carla.
And I'm Evan.
And today we're going to be talking about Frances Ha. This was actually my pick. Very excited about it. What about you, Evan?
Yeah, well, I gotta say, I came in with a little bit of baggage, maybe not baggage, but bias for sure, because I saw Lady Bird, I wasn't huge on Lady Bird, and then I saw Greta Gerwig's name, and I was like, oh, well, this might be a little rough. But I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I mean, it's definitely not anywhere near the top of my list, but I would definitely watch it again. I was surprised how much I liked it, even though, I have some gripes with it. It was enjoyable to watch.
Yeah, no, cool. And the cool thing is that the main character, Greta, she's actually the co-writer next to Noah Baumbach, which is really cool, really interesting, because she made and played this character.
Yeah, I think one of the interviews I watched asked about that. And Greta Gerwig said in the interview, I don't know how much I buy this, but she said, she said she's, different from Frances in a lot of ways. I thought it seemed a lot of it rang autobiographical to me. I mean, I can't presume to say whether it's based on her life or not, but I'm pretty sure a lot of at least scenes in this are based on somebody's life. Probably some on hers, maybe some on Noah Baumbach's. Right. But a lot of, it feels too real and too, there are things that feel, my playwriting teacher says, it's too weird to not be real. So,
Right. No, and I feel like a lot of these scenes, when she went on the date with Lev, and she was like, oh my God, my card isn't passing. I have to run to the ATM. I've been in that situation. And
I'm glad to say I haven't, but it would make for a decent story.
Terrible. You just run to the next ATM, and then, of course, obstacles. Yeah, but we'll get into that.
Uses ATM,
We'll get into all of that. But so basically, now what we're going to do is just go through kind of sequence by sequence.
Yeah, so chronologically.
Yes.
And, so we won't do, a summary this time, just, start at the beginning, and then by the end, once we get to the end, that should be pretty much the end of the show.
Yeah.
Pretty close, anyway.
So the first sequence, the movie opens up with Frances and Sophie. It really focuses on the relationship, how they do everything together, daily routines. And, importantly, they smoke together. And the reason why this is important is because it's a constant theme. Frances says, I don't like to smoke alone. And so, of course, that comes up later on. And the whole kind of scene where they're in bed watching a movie, and another thing that comes up is how Sophie says, Frances, I don't like socks in bed.
Yeah, well, that's more of just a little device that comes back later at the end.
Exactly.
I don't know if it's a theme, but it's at least a motif.
Yes. So yeah, and here we also see kind of that Frances is a little bit more invested. She treats Sophie like her girlfriend. We clearly see this when Frances breaks up with her boyfriend.
Yeah, so that's I think that's between the beginning montage and then the scene where they're in bed. There's the one scene in between that is Frances breaking up with Dan, who we never see again, which I guess makes sense. But he doesn't even really come up much after the scene. But it is kind of it does kind of kick things off, I guess.
Right, and it shows how Frances just cares way more about Sophie than anything in the world, and almost places her first, even before
and ends
herself.
Up getting shot in the foot. This is the first stage of that, which is pretty much what drives the whole movie, is Frances suffering for the things that Sophie chooses to do.
Right, and also they have a conversation about Patch, because Sophie first starts to see Patch, and we basically see them kind of talking about how he's the type of guy to say, I gotta take a leak, and things like that, which we see later on.
Yeah, I thought that was I don't know how to feel about that, because, well, that's maybe the wrong way to put it, but it seemed, from this scene, I felt like Sophie wanted to break up with Patch, and then she just stuck with him, so
Right, which we see a lot in the movie. A lot of times she's oh, he's no one, blah,
she
blah,
makes
blah.
fun of him so much, behind his back, that I feel this is not gonna work.
Yeah, and you think it's not gonna work, because she says it. She's
and we don't see a whole lot of Patch, and actually what we see of him, he seems reasonable enough in the two scenes that he comes up.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, maybe I'm remembering wrong, but the one, I remember he comes up in the scene where Sophie's drunk at the auction, and he's trying to talk her down.
Right.
And then I think there's the scene after Frances's performance at the bar. He doesn't have a whole lot to do, but I guess it just seems like Sophie doesn't really not that I didn't buy them getting engaged, but I kept expecting that they were. I thought it might end with them breaking up.
Right. We get the tail end of their friendship because we start to see scenes where Frances is doing kind of her own thing and trying to get her life together, like grocery shopping and like a whole mini montage.
Yeah, just and like really small too. I think that's like
and leading and
2 shots,
which leads up to the scene where they're in the train and Sophie is on her phone a lot, and it's basically when Sophie tells her that she wants to move to Tribeca.
Yeah. And I just want to talk real quick because like just before that scene, there's like where is it? Here we go. Yeah. So then like just before the scene where they're on the subway, there's like a really quick couple scenes where Frances and Sophie are like really happy together, and this is kind of their constant with like it's basically showing like the same things in the montage just as a different day. Mm-hmm. Which I think I just think it's really important tonally to have those couple scenes there because it makes Sophie's when she asks Frances like asks Frances if it's okay to move away, but she says like I'm gonna leave, that like that's felt more because of those scenes because you can see like Frances has had a couple things go wrong, but Sophie's like her true north kind of thing, and now that's gonna go away.
No, exactly. And like and that's when everything kind of starts to go downhill for Frances and things start to go uphill for Sophie. So it's a break in the friendship, you know? And then in that moment, right after Sophie kind of tries to be like, it's okay, like we'll just be neighbors. And she stands up to check the map, but the camera still focuses on Frances. And the director actually made a comment of that, how they purposely did those type of scenes in order to see the decline of Sophie and Frances's relationship, in that Sophie starts to become more distant, where the story starts to focus way more on Frances and what she's doing through the depiction of those scenes. I think
one thing good. You mentioned, like I don't know that I would necessarily agree that it's like Sophie's incline. I don't think she's necessarily declining, but I think I'm just kind of thinking of this now. Like I think it's a good choice that we don't really see whether Sophie likes where her life is going.
Right.
Like we see that Frances wants Sophie back, but I think this was kind of a question that was in my head the whole time, was like, is Sophie making these choices because she thinks that, you know, it's normal to like, you know, eventually you get married and then you're like, you make your decisions based on, one, your job, and two, your spouse.
Right.
And it seemed like she was kind of, I don't know about like enslaving herself to that, but I was wondering if she was going to like come around to be like, I don't know if this is really what I want. And I think it's maybe a little bit more powerful that we don't know whether Sophie likes these things that are happening to her or not, like whether this is just kind of constant for her, whether she hates living with Patch and wants to move back with Frances, or if things are getting better.
Well, we do see that at the end, but I guess we can talk about that more when that scene comes up.
Well, I mean, it's not like we don't get a sense of what's happening with Sophie, but we don't really get Sophie's take on it. Do you think that's fair to say?
I think we get the take on it at the end, or towards the end. I think we understand what really was going on that whole time in her head, in the sense of like her true thoughts, but also like that was drunk talk, you know, and sometimes drunk talk is very emotional, and sometimes emotions can be skewed. So it is, you are right in the sense of like we truly don't know what is the truth.
Well, we don't know how Sophie feels about, like, we see that it's affecting Frances negatively, but we don't know whether Sophie's getting anything out of it, which kind of puts us on the same page as Frances, because I think she doesn't know how to deal with that either. She's kind of like, I want, like, selfishly she wants to say, like, come back, but without, like, she doesn't want to, like, take Sophie away from whatever.
Well, I kind of feel like she doesn't want, I feel like Frances just doesn't want to accept the truth that she made Sophie her whole world. She doesn't want to accept it, and I don't think that she understands just how much of a weight she put on, like, her relationship with Sophie. Didn't feel exactly the same way back, which is why it was so easy for her to just move in with, like, just go with Lisa and kind of live her own life while still being best friends with Francis. Then Francis felt like she was getting replaced by Patch, which in the end we kind of see as true.
Yeah. I was talking a little more about, like, I mean, I think what you said is valid, but I was thinking more in terms of, like Francis doesn't really know how, like, I think Francis maybe, I'm not totally sure about this, but she might genuinely want what's best for Sophie.
Yes,
but it's kind of hard to tell what that is. Like, what's best for Sophie is that moving back with Francis and, like, going back to
and we just don't know.
Life.
We won't know, and we don't know because, I mean, that's what Francis thinks is best, is for Sophie to ditch Patch and come back with her.
Well, I think that's what Francis wants, but, like, I think it's good that we don't know. Yeah, she wants, selfishly, I think she wants to talk Sophie down from doing, like, making all these big choices and moving away and things like that. Mm-hmm. But it's hard for Francis to tell whether that's really what Sophie wants or not. And that just feels like it gets, like, having us be on the same page as Francis makes her kind of, like, in action with that feel a little more real.
Yeah, so that was a very interesting scene. And then, of course, the scene cuts to Francis living alone. Sophie had already moved out, and she's smoking alone, which is, you know, another kind of little thing that comes up from the beginning. It cuts to her getting her tax rebate, so that's another, like, up in her life, which is very, I think that's very consistent, how, like, there's just ups and downs throughout Francis'
and
life.
That definitely makes it, like, more interesting to watch. Like, there's not so much of a plot, I guess, which I saw that as a bit of a problem, but what keeps it interesting to watch is that there's ups and downs throughout it. The fact that there are just about as many ups as there are downs, I think it keeps us on our toes. Like, you kind of see that more now with, like, TV shows. I guess you were invested to see whether things were going to get better or worse, because it kind of proved early on that at any point things could get better or they could get worse.
Right. I don't know. I don't think things were predictable, especially with the whole up and down and not really having a plot.
Yeah, I thought that was that, which, I mean, is good in that, like, I mean, most movies traditionally you have, like, in the first 10 minutes there's, like, okay, there's some kind of goal. Action movies are usually pretty straightforward with that, or even, I guess, like, rom-coms. It's like, get the two people together, stop the bomb from blowing up, and that keeps us on the hook the whole time. This doesn't really have that, which is why I think it's important that there has to be something that keeps us interested, and I think that was a main thing that kept my attention, at least, throughout the movie, was that, like, it could get better and it could get worse.
Yeah, and of course, like, getting the tax rebate is really small, but then she immediately calls someone and says, hey, like, let's go to dinner. And it's Lev, and we think it's going to be Sophie, but it's actually Lev. And then that's when...
Didn't really have that, but I kind of thought it might be, like, Lev would end up becoming the heart of the movie. Like, I mean, this is Adam Driver before he's Kylo Ren, so, like, there wasn't an obligation to use the star, I guess. But then again, he did have to become
I don't know.
Kylo Ren.
I think
this is just me coming into it, like, without knowing anything. I thought maybe Lev would end up being the heart of the movie. Not the heart of the movie, but, like, a much... He's, like, this is, like, his biggest scene, actually. But, I mean, it was good that, I think, in a way that I kind of thought he would become bigger. Just because that threw me off a little.
No,
not in a bad way.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I thought that she was going to call Sophie because, of course, like, Sophie is her go-to, but I think that shows character development in a micro sense, because she calls Lev to get dinner. Then they get dinner, and then that's kind of the beginning of her relationship with Lev and Benji. Even though Lev is a little bit gross, and he kind of thinks it's a date and tries to... he uses the whole "want to see my room" line, which is what he uses,
which comes up later
with a lot of the girls he brings to the house. But then, of course, Francis just makes a really awkward noise when he tries to touch her. And
I wanted to just briefly touch on that because, like, the action line for that in the script I thought was really good. Here we go. Okay, so it says, they are quiet a little too long. Lev moves toward her and puts his hand on her shoulder. Francis glances at the hand and instantly makes a face and a strange noise that is definitely negative. It's something that if she had thought about for 1 second more, that she wouldn't have done. And like I just thought that translated like perfectly on screen.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit of a lengthy and like on the nose action line, but it comes through well and it was playable, so it's good.
Right.
I might end up talking about that on like a separate episode about like actual words on the page, but that was definitely a positive one.
Yeah. That's a really cool line.
Yeah. And it's like a specific relatable moment too, which is why I think it works.
Yeah. So, and a quote that was really nice was she said, "You guys are like magic." And she made a really good impression on them. She obviously had an amazing time because she says, "This is the best night I've had since Sophie dumped me," which is interesting because we do see throughout the whole movie as if,
nose, but like I think she's the kind of character that would say that too.
Right.
So.
We do see in the whole movie though as if Frances treats Sophie as her partner, as her girlfriend. Even in the small words that she says. And then, of course, right after she meets Benji and Lev, and it cuts to a scene of her running to the song Modern Love by David Bowie, which is shows a very big peak because she is living with people she loves. She is kind of getting back on her feet slowly, and it's a great scene. And then it also cuts to her sleeping, and then Benji and Lev jumping in bed on her, and it's playful.
Yeah. And it was like that was another thing that like kind of added to the like ups and downs kind of thing, because this looks like it could be the thing that gets like this could be her new normal.
Yeah.
And I think maybe if I'd known a little more about the movie before going into it, I might not have expected that, but I did kind of expect like this could be the rest of it. It's just kind of like her living with them.
Yeah. And then that scene cuts into another scene where Lev slept with this girl, and then they come out and she's like, "Oh, like I'm gonna make breakfast sandwiches. Frances, do you want one?" And Frances just goes off about how she has all of these things to do and she can't. And then of course the scene cuts to her sitting down eating a sandwich with them, which I thought was really funny because that is a very consistent thing that keeps happening throughout the film, where she says, "No, I'm not going to do this." And then the scene just completely cuts to her doing that exact thing that she said she wasn't going to do. So it still gives off that impression that she doesn't have it together. She still keeps doing things and kind of what you said, shooting herself in the foot.
Yeah. That scene also kind of softens the blow, I think, of like her not getting together with Lev, because it's like, it's not as if they couldn't have been anything special.
Oh,
like,
of course
they
not.
Probably would have just hooked up for the night, and then that would have been the end of it, because he ends up like, I think it's like 4 different girls that he has over.
Right.
So that like that's not exactly an up, but it does make it less of a down. I think it was important to see, because at that point in the movie, I don't think everyone would have been totally cued in that like Sophie was the heart of the movie. They might like it kind of lets people know, okay, Lev's not important.
And then and that's and then cutting back to that scene, it's very important because we get the first update on Sophie.
Yeah, that's the rest of this conversation.
We get the first update with Frances, where the audience and Frances are sitting there getting news of Sophie, and she just brings her up, and then Frances kind of gets insecure, and we see that because she starts telling everyone that they're best friends, and she gets very nervous. You see it make her feel like upset almost, that she had to find out how Sophie is through this random girl that is nobody basically.
Yeah. I mean, I don't feel like in that moment it hurts as much yet.
But it still ticks her a little bit.
I think it probably like does accentuate the fact that she hasn't really heard from Sophie, but I don't think she realizes yet like how far away Sophie really is from her.
No, she definitely doesn't she doesn't see the truth yet.
Yeah, or at least not all of it. This is the tip of the iceberg, and she's got a lot more to uncover.
That's when you see like, oh, wait a minute, this means that they haven't talked in a minute.
Yeah, and we probably, I think some people, I don't think I was, but I think some people could be like well ahead of Frances there. They're like, oh, okay, like Frances isn't part of her life anymore, but Frances might still be deluding herself into, no, like this is going pretty well. Like,
exactly.
We can still hang out, and then it's like, oh crap, no.
Yeah, like that's not
like that kind of happens throughout the rest of it.
And then during that scene, Benji also says Frances undateable, and he
that's
says
the first time that line comes up.
And he says that throughout the entire movie. He says it a few times, and we also can derive from Benji, his character, that he has a major crush on Frances. Or not major, but he has a crush on Frances.
They like really lightly flirt throughout the movie.
And
maybe not a couple points is not that
Benji flirts. Like, she doesn't. She's just like, okay, Benji's just my roommate who's dumb.
Yeah.
So of course, here's another instance. The next scene is when Benji says, oh, like, let's watch a movie and get takeout because my life is great. And she's like, no, my life sucks. Like, I need to do something about it. And of course it cuts to them sitting, eating takeout, watching a movie. Yeah. So it's just this reoccurring...
I mean, it reestablishes that she's, like, not really that responsible as much as she might like to be.
The next major scene is Sophie visits. This is pretty big because instead of being happy for Frances, she criticizes the place. She criticizes Lev and Benji, and she criticizes the apartment itself. The director actually Noah made a comment, and he said it took 30 takes with that scene.
Oh, wow.
Because he wanted to focus the camera or like have it in a perfect position in order to have Sophie and Frances be seen at the same time, but also for Lev when he comes in from a motorcycle ride or something. He comes back and like has this whole and apparently they really wanted to be specific with this scene, and I think that's why it's very important, as well as Frances has this whole, she's very excited to see Sophie and is like, great, we're going to spend the day together. And then, of course, Sophie's like, I have to go at 5:30.
Yeah. She also suggests that, like, she's like, hey, Lev's kind of your type. You'd date Lev, move in with us. It kind of, like, she's like, hey, maybe this is a second chance to, like, get Sophie back.
And kind of being like, oh, this is great. Things are going to go back to the way they are. Like, we're hanging out again. And it's just her trying to convince herself and even trying to convince the audience that everything's fine. Everything's okay. Sophie is still my best friend and my soulmate. And then in reality, things aren't okay.
I mean, this felt realistic. Like, this scene kind of shows, like, Sophie does actually, like, want to make time for Frances. It's not, like, anything... It's not that Sophie doesn't like Frances anymore. It's, like, Frances is now, like, lower on her list. Like, she's got too much else going on to make time for her. I think it's another one of those things that makes it hurt a little bit more. That, like, it's not complete isolation. It's, like, enough that it's still, like... It's not like there's this one tragedy that, like, takes Sophie completely away from Frances. It's like little bits, chips away at it, so that she still is like, oh, there's like a little bit.
It's like there's hope at the end of the tunnel.
it's like the thing. I know this is like a completely different movie to reference, but like what Bane says to Batman in The Dark Knight Rises, he's like, the thing that makes this prison so torturous is the thought that you might be able to get out, and that's kind of the same thing that happens with Sophie, although obviously. And not like a life or death situation.
No, and that's true, because Frances still has this hope that, like, I think Frances doesn't accept that Sophie is living a life aside from Frances being her number one. That Sophie is kind of moving on from the friendship.
Well, I think what
or growing separately, and that's because she meets Patch. That's because she kind of has like all of these things that are permitting Sophie from really devoting all of her time to Frances.
Yeah. Well, I think it might also be, I'm just kind of thinking of this now, it might also be she kind of expects that, like, oh, Frances isn't like, she kind of expects Frances to be at the same stage as her. She's like, why don't you have, like, a guy that you're almost ready to move in with? I think Sophie maybe is a little thrown off by the fact that Frances is, like, 3 steps behind her in terms of getting, like, a solid standard of living together.
Yeah. This is the perfect transition into when Colleen cuts Frances from the Christmas show.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that came so soon.
That's another blow. And it's crazy because it's a negative after a negative. And it's just, oh, no. Like, the audience is just like, no. Because that was kind of Frances's last saving grace.
Yeah, and that came up, like, a couple scenes before. She was like, okay, I can pay rent. Having someone tell you, like, oh, you don't have as much money as you thought you did, that's rough enough. But in terms of, like, the more relationship, like, emotional side of it, like, it ends up being what makes her have to move out from...
Yeah, because she can't afford it anymore. And then right after she gets the news, she sees Sophie because Sophie went to her recital. And she's so relieved. But then, of course, Patch shows up. Sorry, I had to take a leak. Which is funny
she's
because...
just like, oh, God.
Yeah.
Like, you left me for this guy?
Exactly. And the audience is like, oh, my gosh, Sophie, come on. And then, of course, it cuts to the bar scene. And this scene is pretty... It's when Frances finally...
This is the most written scene in the movie.
Yeah, so Frances finally shows, like, how annoyed she is by being passive-aggressive.
Say she crosses the line into aggressive.
No. She's passive-aggressive when they're sitting down chatting. And then she's like, Sophie, let's go to the bathroom.
And then gets into being...
But you also understand the frustration, because I felt frustrated when Sophie was being, like, not there for Frances. And
she's dealing with Frances like she's being irrational and drunk in this scene. And I think this is, like, the most honest that Frances actually is.
Exactly. And I think it's finally telling Sophie, like, hey, like, why are you treating me like a brunch friend? Like, because she says that. She says that line. Like,
which is, I like that term. And I don't totally know what it means, but, like, I can kind of picture it.
Yeah.
Like, it's a peripheral person.
Like a friend you only see once every now and then.
Yeah, who, like...
just get brunch with.
Yeah, or, like, someone who, you have, like, an inside joke with, but, like, never actually have taken the time to get to know.
Exactly. And I think Frances, I agree with you. I think Frances put that in a perfect way, that Sophie thought she was irrational because she was drunk. That cuts to the scene where where Frances is just picking up everything in her room. And Benji says, like, oh, you're finally cleaning. And she looks at him and goes, I'm not messy, I'm busy. And when Sophie visited, Sophie said, like, oh, you're messy. Like, that's what I like about you. And she's like, I'm not messy, I'm busy. So this is projecting. So Frances just projects and projects throughout the whole movie, basically, of, you know, past things. And, like, she...
Well, you think she, like, puts her problems on, like, she blames them on other people?
No, I think what she does is just, like, she's obviously thinking about Sophie and thinking of what she said, and she's acting out of it.
And she's, like, taking it out on Benji.
And she's taking it out on just, even herself. She's, like, no, like, you know, kind of trying to prove
she's picking the wrong... Well, not that she's picking the wrong villain, but she's picking the wrong outlet. Sure.
And it was, like, for 2 seconds. It wasn't even a huge thing, but, like... Of course,
it's enough to get it across.
It's enough to understand that Frances just keeps thinking about this nonstop, and it's actually starting to affect her. So then, Benji and Lev are a little bit inconsiderate to her situation. At some point, they kind of just are very like, "My life is great, and your life sucks."
Yeah, I think that's more Benji. Lev doesn't really talk to her at this point.
Yeah, and then...
Well, after this scene, I think, is when Frances moves out, right?
Yes. But also, really quickly, Benji... When Benji comes into her room and they start talking, you see that Benji has a crush on her, and you understand it now, because he says...
Yeah, I mean, he basically says it.
Yeah, he says Lev says we're gonna get married, and, like, he kind of just tries to a little bit convince her that, like...
Which is also, like, in that moment is kind of like another, like, a last chance for Frances to stay. Maybe they'll pay the rent if she and Benji start dating, but she decides no.
Really? You thought that?
I mean, I didn't think it initially because I didn't know she was going to, like, leave after that. Mm-hmm. But looking at it now, maybe that could be another, like, function of that scene.
Yeah. Yeah. And
that might be wrong, but, like, it could have been, like, another shot for her to, like, stay in that. Because she obviously likes living with them.
She loves it, but she really can't afford it. But
and that could have been, like... one more chance, but she kind of takes the high road with it and is like, no, I'm gonna, like, get things together instead.
Yeah, because she has no choice, and that's why the next scene is with her parents. I think
the point of that was, like, she does kind of have, like, that gave her a choice there and made it less of a, like, necessity and more telling of her character and her wanting to, like, prove that she's an adult.
But yeah, so, and then the next scene, of course, it's her at the Christmas dinner. And funny enough, obviously we don't see Sophie, but when Frances was talking to that girl that Lev slept with, who gave the first update of Sophie.
Oh yeah, Nessa.
She's
her name.
Yeah, Nessa. She says, and Sophie has been to my house 3 consecutive Christmases. And then, of course, we don't see Sophie at this Christmas, but we see Frances.
So this one's different.
Yeah.
Breaks the pattern.
And we see Frances enjoying herself. We see her having a good time at this Christmas party, being with her parents. And it's almost kind of...
Right. It's a couple weeks where the pressure's off.
Yes, and it's kind of like...
She doesn't have to adult for the week.
But also she is, in terms of her relationship with Sophie, I feel like she's slowly kind of starting to accept the situation. That, okay, Sophie isn't here because we're not talking, and like she kind of like starts, I don't know, it's a distraction from all of that, being home with her parents.
Yeah.
And we see that.
I think that's definitely fair to say.
And there was a montage actually where she kind of does childhood things, like she rides her bike around her neighborhood, she goes to the dentist, but then immediately like eats a sundae with her friends, and then
I don't remember that at all. But
yeah, and then at one point she like touches her teeth because obviously it hurt, and then she takes a long bath, and I thought this was very interesting because when she's kids tend to take very long baths, and I thought it was interesting because her mother was like, Frances, I need to get in there, and she's like, 1 second, and then like it's just this back and forth of like, I need to get in, and she's like, no, and then it ends with her mom just saying, Frances, how much longer? And she just pauses. And I don't know why, but I kind of saw meaning in that because it was kind of like...
You thought it was like the line that like summed up the movie, like, how much longer are you gonna keep this up?
Yeah, how much longer are you gonna keep this childish routine up of like not accepting that things are changing and people are changing and you're just stuck in this...
Yeah, not adapting.
Yeah, okay. And that's dragging her back. And it's interesting that it was her mom who said that because of course your parents don't treat you like a child anymore once you get to a certain age.
And she's like 4 years out of college or whatever.
Exactly. And I don't know. I thought there was like meaning in that just with that singular
You know, though, I think whether that's intended to be like the I don't know if it would necessarily be like the thematic line of the movie, something like that. Even if it's not, I think there's like some good technique there in that line is like Frances has that problem enough that line could organically come out.
Right. In
like people relating to her being her kind of immature self.
Yeah.
One other thing, before we move on from the montage, this is just something that you wouldn't necessarily find anywhere else. So in the script it says, for the montage, the following moments occur as silent scenes of a Sacramento Christmas. The audio playing over all the shots in the sequence is a conversation that Frances is having with her mother while driving in a car around Sacramento, and then in parentheses it says found audio. So I'm pretty sure what that means is like it's a like actual conversation that Greta Gerwig recorded with her mom, and Frances's parents in the movie are played by Greta Gerwig's parents in real life. So pretty likely, I think.
And that's cool. And I think that's
yeah, I don't remember what that conversation's about, but like I mean, it definitely supports my theory that it's like maybe autobiographical.
And that's what makes it so relatable. Like I think that definitely plays into
that's
that.
Definitely like the major charm of the movie, I think, is that it's stuff people can relate to.
Right.
Perhaps to a fault, because there's like not a plot. That was what made it work, I thought, was that like there were so many relatable moments in this movie. That's just kind of proof of that, I guess. Cool.
So then she moves in with Rachel for a little bit, and Rachel isn't really the friendliest person. For example, like when Frances goes, ahoy, sexy, Rachel is like, oh, hey. And then like Frances tries to like
they're
play
not on
fight.
The same wavelength.
Yeah.
At all.
And Frances tries to play fight, and then of course Rachel is just like really not into it. And that kind of gives hints that Frances hasn't moved from like she's not progressing. Like she keeps trying to find a new best friend.
It's like it's a half step. She's like trying to replace Sophie, but like not really in the right way. And also Rachel's just like
really weird.
Yeah,
and,
well, Rachel's like too type A, I think,
Right.
for Frances, or it's just like annoyed by her.
And then especially when like they're at the dinner party and she goes, oh yeah, I'm staying with Rachel for 6 months, and then 6-ish months, and then she goes, it's actually 5 months, and then it was like, whoa, like that was really mean.
That's pretty passive aggressive.
Yeah.
And, like not even trying to really be polite about
Exactly.
it.
She was just like, no, I don't know. I don't really like Rachel. She's like my least favorite character next to Colleen.
I think Rachel's a lot worse than Colleen.
Oh,
Colleen's
way worse.
Understandable. Rachel's just kind of mean not for no reason. Well, okay, yeah, for no reason.
I think Colleen. I mean, we'll talk about Colleen later on, but and another thing is that Rachel is in the main company and Frances isn't. Frances is still an understudy, so I feel like that kind of plays into it.
There's a little bit of like class rivalry there, I guess.
And Frances kind of, and this is the scene where I kind of realized that Frances really grabs any opportunity she can take to talk about Sophie, which is very interesting because Frances gives an unnecessary explanation to the table as to her connection with Paris when the couple brings up Paris, and she's like, oh yeah, Sophie never liked him anyway, like you know what I mean. So it's kind of weird that she tries to incorporate.
Yeah, she gives this explanation. I noticed that it's like about Abby, who lives in Paris, and she like goes into like the whole dynamic of her social life in college, and they're just kind of like, okay, like, I don't
why?
care, but I don't want to tell you to shut up yet.
Right, and then she just talks about Sophie. She just a little bit like mentions how like Sophie didn't like the guy or whatever. So then one of the guys there says, oh, you know my coworker Patch, and they kind of both express dislike for him, which was kind of funny because Patch is a pretty dislikable person in the sense that of how much he affects the relationship of Sophie and Frances.
Yeah,
but
he's the antagonist. Like, I mean, I didn't really notice. We didn't see a whole lot of Patch.
Yeah,
like he was kind of the thing that was pulling
Sophie away from Frances.
Yeah, But we didn't like have a villainous face to put with him. Like he never actually does anything to make us dislike him, I think.
Right. And then Frances explains her relationship with him, and she says, talking about Sophie, and then she goes, Sophie and I are the same person, but with different hair. She says that for the second time. The first time she said that was to Nessa, which is funny because this is, again, another series of repetition. So then talks about her and Sophie, and they try to compliment Sophie. They say, oh, yeah, she seems smart. She seems book smart. And then...
Yeah, and then Frances kind of shoots them down. Like, oh, she's not, like, that smart, actually.
Exactly. And then they're like, no, she seems pretty smart. And she's like, I actually read more. And it's, like, the competitive factor again, where it's, you know... Like,
I mean, I read that more as, like, Frances trying to build herself up in front of these, like, slightly more put-together, like, higher-class people. But it could be either, for sure.
No, for sure. And but I think it was... I mean, I personally think it was competition, especially since Sophie... admits, like, I always felt I was competing. Something along the lines, she says, I always felt like I was competing with you. We'll talk about that scene in a bit. But, but
the end of the, well, it's like the first half of this scene is like the next update on Sophie when finds out she's moving to Japan, which is, like, major.
Yeah.
And she doesn't know, and it's, like, already set in stone.
And that was very hard-hitting, I think, for Frances and for the audience, because that's when Frances just realizes... she's moving to Japan. She didn't even tell me, and...
Well, it's like she can't stop pretending that Sophie is ghosting her now.
And that's when she realizes it. And I think, obviously, the audience sees that in a humorous way because she just takes the bottle of wine and fills up her glass.
Yeah.
When she said, no, I'm trying not to drink tonight. And then she talked about how, like, she has, like, 4 cups of vodka or something like that, and she gets crazy, which is obviously alluding... or is obviously referencing...
Yeah, the scene in the bar.
Exactly.
With Patch and Rachel.
So it was interesting because, of course, she starts drinking and it cuts to her kind of being drunk. And this is her only monologue, which has a lot of depth to it. And so I'm just going to read that real quick. So opens up and she's telling this to everyone that's at the dinner party. She goes, Nadia, I want this one moment. It's what I want in a relationship, which might explain why I'm single now. Haha. It's like that thing where you are with someone and you love them and they know it, and they love you and you know it, but it's a party and you're both talking to other people and laughing and shining, and you look across the room and catch each other's eyes, not because you are possessive or that it's precisely sexual, but because that is your person in this life. And it's funny and sad, but only because this life will end, and it's a secret world that no one else knows about that exists right there in public unnoticed. Sort of like how they say other dimensions exist all around us, but we don't have the ability to perceive them. That's what I want out of a relationship, or just life, I guess. Yeah, I think this monologue is beautiful in so many ways, and I think we can all relate to that, and I think we've all like felt that. We see this in the end, in their final interaction in the movie, which is this precise thing when she looks over and Sophie looks at her, and they have that moment with each other of like, I am so proud of us. We are okay. We are best friends.
Well, it's kind of like, I think it's more like a permanence thing. It's like, no matter what happens, like,
we will always be together. Yeah. And that's why I think that monologue is so important, because that is all Frances ever wanted in this entire movie. That's all she ever wanted, was just knowing that her and Sophie would be okay in the end, or would still be best friends. It's kind of like relieving, because we do see that at the end. You know, we'll talk about this more with the ending.
I do want to talk briefly about like just the placement of the monologue though, because so something you hear about with musicals is like, within the first like 15 minutes of a musical, you have the characters sing their I Want song, which basically sets up like the goal of the movie. This is coming like more than halfway through the movie, which this is like stating her intent. But I think it's good that the monologue comes late, because if this had come at the beginning, I don't think we would have bought it. Yeah. But it comes after we've seen her working toward it, and it does just kind of give like confirmation to what she's working toward. I talked about this a little bit last week with like showing character through action with Lou. Like, there's enough action that Sophie takes throughout the movie that backs up what she's saying here, that it feels more honest, and it wouldn't work if you put this earlier. And I don't think it would work that well if you put it later either, because it would feel too much like it was wrapping things up maybe if it came too much later. I don't know if there's necessarily like a specific lesson to be taken from that, but it's at least good instinct to like, I think, to know that this is good placement for this monologue, like tonally.
No, and I think this is a perfect placement, because the minute she takes that bottle, I think that's like the acceptance of defeat in a way. I think that's when she realizes, you know what, that's it. Like, it's the moment of acceptance. And I think this monologue is more of like a I'm done being angry, I'm done holding all of these angry feelings towards Sophie, and kind of being like, all I want is just to feel loved, and to, well, basically what the monologue
it's letting
says.
go of the grudge.
Exactly, and she let go of it, and I think that is very nice, because we see that once she did let go of it, after this scene, things started to get a little bit better, and everything starts to get better.
I think it's an important moment is when she starts taking more action, not necessarily good action, but like more drastic action.
No, because it does start to get even worse, because she just takes
going to Paris.
And that's a perfect transition into the next scene, is when she just agrees to go to Paris, and is just, or doesn't even agree.
She just decides, she's like, you know what, I'm gonna go to Paris.
Exactly.
That's a good idea.
And that's kind of like her scapegoat almost, and which is kind of like, we all are like, oh no, that's not a good idea for 2 days, because it takes like hours, like 6 hours, no, even longer.
I don't know how long the flight is, but it's a lot, and it's a lot of jet lag.
Exactly.
And a lot of money, which she doesn't have.
Yeah, so, you know, she runs into Benji, and Benji has a new girlfriend, and it's just a very weird interaction, because the girl is Caroline, is that her name?
Yeah.
She's very unlikable. She's kind of rude, and like just says out of pocket stuff. Frances is like, oh, I have a meeting with Colleen, and then she goes, I don't know you, and then they just continue. Like, it was kind of like uncomfortable going the conversation. Like, they don't even acknowledge that she said that.
That might not have made it in. That might have been something
Ad-lib.
They improv.
Probably.
Yeah. The line that I like in this scene that was just kind of fun is, she goes, I have so much to do. I think I'll read Proust, because I think sometimes you should just do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it. And I was like, well, I mean, I agree. I don't know if reading Proust goes into that category.
Yeah, she makes really, like, her decision making is, like, not all too great.
It's like I don't know if that exactly backs up like her going to Paris, but maybe that's the mentality.
Right. The audience kind of realizes that they are no longer living together, that Frances moved out. And also it feels like, it didn't make anything better that she ran into Benji, because it almost makes her realize, I just missed an opportunity of being with Benji or something like that.
Right.
Because
it's making her regret that decision.
Because she was focusing way too much on Sophie, who was most likely not thinking about her in that way either.
So she got slapped twice.
Exactly. And that made her, and that was like kind of like a realization. So then cut to the scene with Paris. This whole experience is just really not good for her. It's really...
she tries to meet up with her friend Abby, who we never see.
Abby doesn't even get the phone calls until literally when Frances is on her way back home.
Inconveniences that happen there. Like, she misses Abby by like a day, and then misses Sophie by like a day at the same time. It's like, it couldn't have timed things worse.
It was terrible timing. Yeah, and you see that because she can't get in contact with Abby. She tries, for example, one of the scenes is she tries to go into a door and it's closed and she's just walking and she doesn't know what to do. And then, of course, we get to the scene where Sophie calls her. And that's
a big scene.
That's a big scene because that's when they finally make up. And that's when Sophie is like, hey, I'm moving to Japan. And that's also where Frances just lies to Sophie about how great her life is and the dance company and everything. And she just doesn't tell Sophie, like, she didn't make it into the dance company. She's not traveling with them. And just lies about where she is. She doesn't even tell her she's in Paris. When she's like, oh, this call is costing me a fortune. And she goes, why? And then Frances is like, no, it's not costing me a fortune. Which is interesting. And that, again, comes up with the competitive factor. Like, is she kind of trying to be like, my life is good too? Or if she's trying to be like, I'm living my life happy without you.
Yeah, I think I read it more as like her not wanting Sophie to feel bad about moving to Japan. Like, she wanted to be happy for Sophie, or at least have Sophie believe that, like, I support this decision. Yeah.
Of course, like, we feel really sad for Frances because they make up, and then Sophie invites Frances to their going away party, and we feel really, really sad for Frances because she can't make it, and this is the last time that she can see Sophie. And of course, this rash decision happened because Sophie was moving to Japan, and this hit her so hard that she was just like, you know what, I'm gonna leave too. And it's just sad because it's one blow after another.
Yeah. And to top that off, when she gets back, she finds out that like she goes back to have a meeting with Colleen, and then Colleen's like, oh, I could have moved that. And Frances is like, well, that's great. Like, I could have stayed in Paris one more day.
Exactly. And it's terrible because Colleen even just treats Frances like nothing. Like, I think Colleen could have treated Frances better. I mean, again, like, she just is very passive with Frances, and it means a lot to Frances. Everything she's doing, even as an understudy, came back from Paris so early because she thought that this meeting would be so important. And then Colleen has the audacity to just be like, oh, I was about to cancel it because I had an itchy throat. That is just so inconsiderate.
See, I kind of read that more as Colleen being nice about it. She was making time for Frances. I guess that's not such an important thing, but I really don't think Colleen's that bad.
It would be great if our audience could give us their insight too. So please write in the comments what you thought.
That could resolve the dispute.
Yes.
This is getting pretty close to the end here. So this is, she goes back to college, or like moves into it. She moves into a dorm, and like I think she gets money.
It's the same college that her and Sophie went to.
Yeah.
So she goes back as an RA, and this is where she meets Sophie unexpectedly. In this scene, it's where she's pouring wine. She pours for this congresswoman, and the whole event is run by this, or is for this congresswoman. And the congresswoman starts flirting with this student, and of course they end up making out. And I thought it was a political jab. It is.
I thought it was just kind of like, I thought it was just kind of like make light of the scene.
No, yeah, I agree with that too. I think if
it came out today, you'd have a harder time with that, considering how much scrutiny politicians are under at the moment. But 2013, I think it was like fair game to do that. So.
Oh, another thing that the audience can give their input in.
Yeah, when that happened, didn't really know anything about it.
But yeah, so she sees, Frances sees her, and Sophie is having an argument with Patch, and then after that, Frances overhears Sophie say that we're engaged, and she kind of freaks out and just goes, "You're engaged?" So then it cuts to them hanging out, and then some stuff happens. Patch and Sophie keep fighting, and then Sophie ends up
staying at Frances's dorm.
There's a scene where Sophie throws up and Frances holds her hair, which is what she said when they were fighting in the bathroom with that big fight when she was like, "Stop treating me like your brunch friend." She says before that, she goes, "I hold your hair. I know where your pills are." And then they're in bed talking, and just like they were in the beginning of the movie. And then Sophie starts just admitting that she isn't happy in Japan. She wants to leave. She doesn't want to be with Patch. And then she just makes this whole plan of, "I'm going to leave Patch and I'm going to move to New York and I'm going to go back to you." And Frances is ecstatic about that. Sophie admits she feels competitive with Frances. And this is kind of alluding to kind of the dinner party when Frances was like, I actually read more than her. Or when Frances showed her the apartment and was like, "Look at this. I'm living in a rich person's house." And it's just this kind of competition factor. And
I really didn't see the competition when I first saw it, but like after hearing your dissection of it, I'd say it may not definitely be Frances's motivation, but it very well could be.
Yeah, and I think it's both of them kind of being like, I'm okay, but in the end they just really love each other and need each other, and maybe, not to the extent of like living together and doing every single thing together, but they still want each other in their lives. And
but there is like a little bit of a slap on the face after, because Sophie leaves a note in Frances's room and is like, "I don't remember what happened." And
exactly.
It's like, oh no, because
it meant so much to Frances, and the fact that Sophie completely forgot about it.
And then we found out she blacked out.
And was just saying these things. So it kind of puts into perspective, is what she was saying about Japan and Patch true?
I think it may have been, but at the end of it, like if she doesn't remember, then that's it's kind of hard to read into that moment at all, or like I guess Sophie leaving the letter, whether she meant it or not, because we don't see a whole lot after that. It's just it cuts to I would guess it's a few months later. Sophie's moved back, so we don't really know why.
Well, she was running. That whole sequence ends with Frances frantically running out and trying to catch her before she leaves. And then I think that was the turning point in Frances' life where she was like, "You know what? I need to move on. I need to be my own person."
It's so hard to tell, though, because we don't get any of that.
But we do. We see... I mean, yeah, we...
No, we know where it ends, but, like, there's there's nothing about the process.
But you can infer from it, because it cuts to the scene where is sitting at the secretary job. She took the secretary job, and she's much happier. She's laughing. She's smiling. She's finally changing, and I think she accepted change. And then she finally starts doing her own things, finally starts choreographing, which is what she always wanted to do since college, which she mentions
to Colleen.
To Colleen earlier in the movie. That's why I think that was the turning point for Frances. This cuts to the scene where she presents her show. She finally presented her show, and you can infer that the dance reflects the journey she kind of went on.
I don't really know enough about dance to like.
No. You don't even have. You don't even have to. If you look at the dance, it's like one person against the tide almost.
I really don't remember, but if I go
watch
back,
it again.
Maybe,
Watch it again. It's very
I'll have to go
interesting.
Back and see that.
And you can infer that the dance is based on her journey because it keeps cutting to every major character who's sitting in the audience watching. And I think that's a very important scene choice. Or cuts, important choice of cut, because everyone is shown, everyone, during that, and then during her creation, during her work performance, and hence, towards the end, like the ending of that show, everyone's mingling, everyone's talking, and first we learn that Sophie and Patch are married. They got married because...
Is it married or engaged?
Married. No, because they got engaged at the banquet when she was pouring. That they got engaged. And then this is when they are married. They're married.
Oh, yeah, it is. Okay,
yeah.
Sorry.
they're married, and then it cuts to Benji and Francis talking, and then he says undateable, and she goes, oh, like me, and then he goes, no, I'm undateable.
So there's like a spark of hope that they could get together.
Yeah, he asks, are you undateable, or are you not dating anyone? She goes, yeah, and he's like, I'm not dating anyone either, and then they kind of just smile at each other, and that can infer that they're probably going to end up together.
Yeah, or there's at least a possibility. I mean, that's also not the relationship we care about, because then it tops off with
yes, so then
Sophie.
This one is a very important and kind of beautiful scene, and it goes back to the monologue, because Colleen is talking to Frances, and to note, she's talking to Frances as a higher up now. She's not down talking her, she's up talking her, I guess, if that's a term. But then in the middle of that, Frances keeps looking over at Sophie, and then Colleen asks, who are you making eyes to? And she just goes, that's Sophie. She's my best friend. And they're both smiling at each other and looking at each other, which is exactly what...
we get the payoff from what she said in her monologue.
Yes, and that is a beautiful moment, because it kind of, everything just came together in their relationship of going from kind of okay to really bad to finally being completely okay. And that is really nice. And she said it in not a passive way. She finally kind of has what she wanted in terms of life. She wanted love, and to just have that moment with Sophie again.
Yeah. I would just say this is kind of the main gripe I have with the movie. This ending didn't work great for me. I'm happy for Frances here, but I'm not proud of her. Like, I don't think Frances is the one who changes with this story. Things do get better for her. This is, like, we didn't see where Frances got to get to this point, so, like, I think the ending could have been a little better. Just because that's kind of what I feel like stories are kind of meant to be, is, like, characters changing. And Frances is definitely in a different place at the beginning than at the end, but I don't really think she's a different person at the beginning than at the end. Really, the person who changes is Sophie, which it's refreshing in a way to have a movie that doesn't do, like, the conventional thing where, like, the person who changes is kind of, like, on the side, because it makes Frances very relatable to be in the position where it's like she's getting, like, the repercussions of all of Sophie's decisions like that. There's a reason that most movies do that, where it's like having the character change and, like, having sort of more of a goal, and, like, have them, like, have a flaw that they've switched at the end. It makes it feel a little bit more...
Yeah.
It puts a button on it nicely. It makes it feel a little bit more... Gives it more closure that I thought kind of lacked here and made it a little unsatisfying. However, it was a good, like, hour and a half ride to that point. The ending isn't awful. Like, I am happy for her. Like,
I see... Well, you're talking about the ending with Sophie, because that's not the ending.
Oh, yeah.
So, but yeah.
It's the climax,
I can see... I am a bit upset with the fact that Sophie ended up marrying Patch. That's the only thing I kind of didn't like, because I almost wish that the ending was just that Sophie ended up not marrying Patch, but they still are living very separate lives, Frances and Sophie, which I think would have been a much better ending. But I mean, of course, we can't change anything about it. So I think, but I understand where you're coming from. But of course, the very ending, I was very pleased with. I was so happy about that. Frances has her own place. Okay, she's making enough money to sustain herself. She's responsible. She did everything she wanted, and she got everything she wanted in the end, even after facing all of those obstacles. And the cool thing that I thought the directors made a very good decision with was playing Modern Love once she puts her name in the mailbox, and once the credits roll in, because the time when Modern Love, when we first heard that, was when she was really happy at the peak of...
Yeah, right after she moved in with Lev.
Exactly.
It's also just a great song.
It's a great song. But I think it's really cool because they picked that song to kind of just show, yes, she's happy. She's super happy, and they ended it with it. So...
Yeah.
Very, I don't know.
Right.
To wrap it up, I personally picked this movie because it's one of my favorite movies. I see my best friends in this movie, you know, a lot of it best friends, and it's really nice.
I would agree that it's a very relatable movie. It definitely wasn't my favorite, but I think I'm a little too mainstream to, like, fully appreciate this movie. Like, I'm not, like, indie or hipster enough, really.
Oh my gosh.
But like I did like it more than I expected to. So
Nice.
that's good. I'm glad you picked it. Yeah, next week's podcast is going to be probably Gone Girl. I'm hoping to split that into 2, but
Yeah.
I guess we'll see.
Really hope you guys have seen Frances Ha. If you haven't,
Shouldn't have listened to this podcast.
but go see it. It's amazing. Rewatch it with everything we just said. Please, if you have any comments, if you disagree, if you agree. Thank you so much for listening, guys. Again, I'm Carla.
And I'm Evan, and we'll be back next week with Gone Girl.